Have you pondered what allowance to make in your budget for carrying risk? I certainly have. It all came to a head for me decades ago when I was facilitating a risk workshop for two large international companies coming together in a joint venture to tender for a mega project. At the end of the risk workshop, they asked me what they should allow in the budget for all these risks. Before I continue, I should quickly introduce myself. My name is Gavin Halling, founder of Risk Tools, and the above question has been asked many times. So let me continue the story. A technique I have often found helpful in similar situations is to respond to a question with a question. So I asked them what they normally did. Both said they took the likelihood, converted it to a probability, multiplied that by the worst case cost, repeated the process for all risks and summed the result. At that point, I suspect I looked a little quizzical. Here's what they were saying. I suggested if this was true, they would be way too conservative and would not win any work. I paused to let that sink in and then went on to explain that if they had, say, a 40% probability of a risk occurring, then 60% of the time the risk would not eventuate and the cost would be zero. Additionally, the worst case, by definition, was unlikely and certainly would not apply for every risk. After further delving, it became clear that they did in fact undertake the exercise, but that senior management looked at the market and applied whatever value they thought was appropriate. In short, the project manager's risk cost allowance was largely ignored. So the problem was clear, but what was the solution? What was needed was a model that accounted for the probability and a more realistic range of costs rather than a single point incorrect worst case guess. I built a model that accommodated these variables and we derived a much more realistic risk cost allowance. That sounds much easier than it was. Building the model and generating meaningful reports was time consuming and expensive, and hence only worthwhile for large projects. But what about other projects? The answer was to build a project-specific model. We called it Risk Valuer. Here is the input screen. The variables are the probability of the risk occurring and a range of costs if the risk did occur. The probability is derived from the likelihood using an inbuilt conversion table. The conversion values used have been derived over many workshops. That said, the table can be changed so they apply to all risks, or the probability for a single risk can be changed by the project manager. The initial risk data is uploaded and then a small workshop held to confirm the probabilities and identify the range of potential costs. Once that is done, it is a simple case of running a simulation by selecting the number of iterations, desired p-level, and then hitting the simulation button. This produces 3 reports. The histogram P50 value shows the anticipated cost outcome. The actual value may be a little higher or lower than this amount. The tornado diagram shows which risks are having the biggest impact on the risk cost allowance. Undertaking treatments to lower these risks will help reduce the allowance. Finally, there is the input report. This enables stakeholders to see the inputs and gain confidence in the resulting risk cost allowance. There are other benefits. I am not sure which would be your headlines, but I have found 1 and 4 to be particularly helpful. So, Risk Valuer enables an allowance for carrying risk to be assessed efficiently. It is also effective as the allowance is realistic. Efficiency and effectiveness are good ways of measuring value. So much for risks. What many do not appreciate is budgeting needs to consider a second area, and that is the uncertainty associated with cost estimates. This is covered in stage 3 of this playbook, and I look forward to catching up with you then.